Hi, everyone. Welcome to another recorded book discussion in our Black Lives Matter series. Tonight, we are discussing the novel Bluebird by Attica Locke. And before we get started, maybe we can just go around and introduce ourselves. I will start. I'm Lucy. I'm a library tech in the youth department, but I do adult programming as well. And I'm excited to be talking about this book tonight.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth. I am a librarian at the library in the collections department, but I also do a great deal of youth and adult programming, and I buy the adult fiction, large print and book on CD collections.
I'm Beth, and I'm on the supportive services team of the library, and yeah, a library technician. And I also do a lot of other things at the library.
Like Beth, I'm also a library tech. I'm on the adults and seniors services team, and my name is Jacob.
My name is Marissa. I'm also a library tech, working with Jacob in adult services, and I do a lot of outreach work.
Hello,
Yeah,
this is Amanda. Oops. My name is Amanda, and I am a library technician, and I also work in youth services alongside Elizabeth and Lucy. And it's been a while since I've done a book discussion, so happy to dive into this novel tonight.
Hi, I'm Anne. I'm a book processor and I primarily work out of the Westgate branch.
All right, so to get started, I don't know if anyone wants to provide a brief summary, just sort of plot points for this. I mean, I'm happy to do it if nobody does, but is there anyone who wants to take a stab at it?
I can give it a go.
Sure.
There's a lot of well, not a lot, but there's definitely some side plots in the book. So I'm going to try to stick to kind of the overarching description, and then maybe we can get into more. But the book centers on Darren, who is a Texas Ranger. But as the book opens, we learn that he's on suspension because he kind of got involved in a altercation where there was a hate crime against one of the Black folks in his community. It should also be said that Darren is Black, and which is race is a huge part of this story. Anyway, but he can't help but kind of, despite his badge being suspended at the time, look into a double homicide that happened in a small town in East Texas. A Black man and a white woman were both seemingly murdered. And so he kind of heads there to investigate and finds himself very deep in the case, which is kind of what the book revolves around, and the various members of the small community that where the murders have taken place. So that's kind of left a lot out, but I feel like that's kind of a good setup, hopefully, for what we'll talk about.
I think so. I think that's a good basic covering of it. So thank you for doing that. I just want to start by asking what everyone's experience of the book was like. Was this something you were familiar with? Were you familiar with the author? Did the book immediately draw you in, or did you take a little bit?
I was not familiar with the author and wasn't familiar with the storyline. I mean, I probably looked at it when we were given the title to decide that I would read it, but and it didn't draw me in. Like, it wasn't a book that I just like couldn't put down. Um I was curious about it. I felt some of the characters were kind of, formulaic and familiar seeming. But and one other thing was, I was surprised after I finished it that I didn't realize the author was a woman. Because I felt like the women in the book really didn't have a lot of me to a lot of depth, except for the Geneva. So it did surprise me that she was a woman. But anyway, it was, it was okay. I don't think I would read. There's another, it's part of a trilogy, so I don't know that I would read it. I don't know. Didn't grab me.
I had a similar experience. I actually listened to the book on audio for this, and I had kind of began it in fits and starts. So I had to kind of restart to get reacquainted with, especially the beginning of the novel, when the court case is going on before he ends up in Lark. And what kept me going was knowing that this was the first in a series and knowing that this was police procedural. So we're getting to know the main detective really well. And this doesn't, because I also agree with Beth that with some of the lack of more character development with some of the female characters or any of them really besides Geneva was the main one. But what kept me going was knowing that it was police procedural. We're getting to know this detective. And what I like about a good police procedural is that they're usually dark and brooding. There's a past, you get to know their family, and then that comes into play with their work. And I've read some other series in the past, and I haven't done it in a while. So it was nice to kind of be back under that lens. So that kind of kept me going as far as getting through the book. I did enjoy this story. I don't think the book was perfect, but it kind of, once I got through like the first three quarters, I was like, oh, okay, now we're getting into it because it really falls down to like so many people and the family structure and the history of the town. And I thought that was really interesting. And I could see how I'm probably not going to read the next one, but I can see why somebody who regularly loves to read just like quick and easy, like these mysteries and police procedurals, this is a good one to have under their belt to go with this one and then just jump right into the next one because we got a cliffhanger here, y'all. So for me, that's kind of what got me through the book. And there were some enjoyable parts of it. And I did like learning about this town of Lark. And I've not read or seen many things involving Texas Rangers, which I thought was pretty cool. So yeah, there's a lot to dive into in the book, but yeah, I enjoyed it. Not my normal cup of tea, but I enjoyed it.
Definitely not my normal cup of tea either. And I guess I found that I was in a place to read a book like this more than I expected that I was. I'm not a very big mystery reader, and I think this is a pretty straightforward mystery. But every, 3 or 4 months, I'm like, ooh, I could do for one of those. So the timing worked really well for me. Um, I I loved the character of Geneva. I loved Randy too. There was some meat on Randy's bones. Um, being the only man saying this here, it doesn't feel right. Um,
Yeah,
I'm like, no. Um,
it wasn't super deep. I didn't, but anyway, you go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
no. Um, I loved learning about Texas Rangers. Loved the setting and vibe, like the kind of like the desolate highway, the dust, the bayou, the smell of the bayou. Like I think that author did a really good job with that. Like every time I opened the book, I'm like, I went back to a place. I was transported to a place, which is a fun reading experience. Um, I think what propelled me in reading the book, because at some points I was not captivated, but what kept me moving was I liked the moral issue that Darren had. He had the one uncle who was like, you need to be a Texas Ranger because you need to protect Black people. And then his other uncle is like, you need to be a lawyer because you need to protect Black people from the law. And I'm like, oh man, that tension was interesting throughout the book, and to see what Darren chose or where Darren landed or how he came to understand that kind of two different ideologies was maybe the most worthwhile aspect of that I got from reading this book.
I
I
personally really enjoyed this book. Oops, sorry, Marissa.
no, go for it, Anne. Go for it.
Um, I think for a lot of the reasons that people have been talking about, it wasn't a completely out of the box mystery. It was a very straightforward kind of traditional police procedural. I also think that's why a lot of the women characters weren't as fleshed out as Darren was. It's because it's his story. But I also really enjoyed kind of I made a note that the author is kind of penning both condemnation and a love letter to Texas in this book, because she does not hold back about the racism and all of that, but it also is very clear that there is a love of the state by the main character, and you can understand why um, he stays there, well, goes back there after having left. Um, but then that dichotomy, there was a line, and I don't know where it was in the book because I wrote down a page number from the digital copy, which is not helpful. But it said, for Black folks, injustice comes from both sides of the law. They often get locked up for things they didn't do, and their crimes don't get investigated. And it's that same, are you providing more service by trying to change the law, or by trying to change how the law is executed? I don't know. I It wasn't profound, but it was uh more interesting than a lot of just mystery procedurals can be because of those topics.
Yeah, I would agree with all of pretty much what's all been said. Um, yeah, there were a few times I had to double check that that the author was a woman for some reason. I was like, wait, who's the author? Which is also funny because this is not the first book I've read by this author. I don't know. I don't keep track of names. I'm really terrible at that. Um, I read The Cutting Season by her, which I think is from 2012, which I really loved that book. That is not a police procedural. Um, Highly recommend that book. It's more of like a family drama, mystery, historical drama set in Louisiana on a plantation. But there's also like similarly, race is a big factor. There's like a migrant worker. So it's also like paralleling historical, like white black racial tensions with then current modern day use of like Latino workers. So like that was really interesting. Highly recommend that book. This one for me was a little harder to get into, maybe just because it's like a more straightforward police procedural. It felt very like pulpy, which I think just helped me kind of just like I know what I'm getting, pulpy, just like lean into it. I didn't realize it was part of a series. Um, but I think it works as a standalone. Um, yeah, and I kind of just like leaned into kind of like the cliche of it. I thought was kind of very fun and just rolled with it. And some of that I really just enjoyed with the added depth of the family drama and the race issues at play and how it all like fit together, I think really worked for me in a lot of ways. And I ended up really liking the book. There were a few times where I just like wasn't fully loving. I don't know if it was the style for some reason, but I did really enjoy it overall. So
One comment I was going to make is that Attica Locke, the author, has written frequently for television. And I felt like I could tell that while I was reading. I felt like the way she set up the different scenes and the like locations in the book, thought it would make a very good television show. But I also thought that it almost might make like, and I enjoyed the book. I gave it a 3 star. I gave it 3 stars in my mind. So out of 5. But I almost thought it would make a better show because I think it would have helped me to like see the characters. That would have helped me kind of like move things along, I found myself often being like, wait, okay, who's who? Just because that's how the police procedurals sometimes are. And like there were several juniors in this book who, so they were like people with the same name. And so I just was thinking as I was reading that the way that she writes almost seems like it would be great for television. And I just had that in my mind. But other than that, I have been enjoying what everyone else has been saying.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Elizabeth, because it makes sense because we do get to know the sense of place more than some of the characters because the setting is so important and she describes everything so well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's good to
Yeah,
know.
that's true. Yeah. Yeah, I mean the descriptions and the settings, I did feel transported and I did, I enjoyed it and I would recommend it for, folks that like that genre. Uh so yeah, but I also was kind of picturing it as a like a mini series kind of show. Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would agree pretty much with what everyone said. And there's a lot we talked about setting and place and characters and, the race issues in the book. There's a lot in all of that. One thing I liked this book. It took me a bit to get into, and I wonder, in looking back, if that's from some of the beginning parts don't really start. Like first we hear from Geneva in this graveyard, and we're not really sure why, and then we get Darren um, at a grand jury trial. So it's sort of like an interesting way that we get into the story, and it's only in thinking back on it that I like thought more about why she might have introduced it that way. But one thing that really struck me about this book was the timing of like when it was written and when I was reading it. She wrote this book. I think she finished it in like 2016. It was published in 2017. So this is right when, this was during Trump's first presidency. And I read some interviews with her where she was like, and instantly my book changed, like without me doing anything. My book took on like a different meaning. And so then it's always interesting to me when I'm reading a book that was written, like 10 years ago or almost 10 years ago, to think about the time when I'm reading it. And so it's just felt strangely, it was weird because it became so relevant again reading the book right now. And there was a lot about the story that really struck me, and um, how she's providing this view of, like someone said, Texas, the reality of what can really happen in Texas as far as like, the white nationalists, but then like the Darren and his family really loving it and having been there for a very long time. So it took me a bit to get into, but once I got into it, I thought there was a lot to think about. And there's a lot to talk about. It's hard to know where to start. Like, do you start with characters, setting, the the greater race issues? Someone mentioned that they really liked Geneva and Randy. Were there other characters that were interesting or compelling, or that you liked or really didn't like? I mean, some I can see why you wouldn't like them because of their behavior, but otherwise, that stuck out to you.
The uncles that raised Darren. I wanted a whole book about them, especially with like the romance issues, like the brothers, they both love the same woman, them raising Darren. Um, I want to know more about the uncles.
I thought that Darren's mom was very interesting, also fairly sad, but um, I was, I felt throughout the book like there was something more that was going to happen with her, and I didn't expect that to be in the last like 4 pages. So I kind of thought that like maybe we weren't going to get any more, but I thought her story felt like somewhat quite untold in this book. And obviously she is a alcoholic who lives alone and asks Darren for money and kind of just seems to lead sort of a tough life. But it seems like perhaps if I were to pick up the second book in the trilogy, maybe we would get some more background about her, which I thought would be interesting because she definitely seemed like she had a story to tell that we didn't get much of in this book.
Yeah, and there may be more about the uncles in that. Has anyone read? I don't know if has anyone read the second one? Did we say? Okay. I mean, I might.
I've started it, but I've only gotten a couple chapters into it. And his mom is in it. I don't know how much about her full story will be told in it, but it picks up, I want to say like 6 months after this book. So some time has gone by, including the election having happened, and we're into the new administration and kind of how that impacts some of the uh, office politics around the Rangers.
That's cool. And I do think that, again, having this like main character who is the detective for a series, like you're slowly going to get to know this character and his family and the reasons why he is the way he is. And so having the mom play a little bit in this one and then picking it up again in the next one, that's totally on recipe. So I think that's fantastic. I was trying to think of some other characters I enjoyed in this. I like some of the smaller scenes that like when he first gets there and he's like back in the alley Darren is pretending to smoke a cigarette and kind of talk to the local people behind Geneva's. I like some of that conversation because you got to see some of more of the like local color and kind of piecing together how people may have knew each other. I think the girl's name was Wendy, who also worked with, and she was in the alley hanging out. Was she smoking? And I like that those kinds of conversations, even though they're like smaller bit characters, it kind of you get to know more of like the charm or how the town works together and doesn't work together in certain respects. It kind of just kind of puts the puzzle pieces on the table for you just to get going. And when that started happening, when he started interacting more with the folks in town, that's when it started to pique my interest a little bit more beyond just trying to figure out what his deal was like, oh, he's on a mission. What is the mission? Who are the people that are there?
I also liked the food references and how the descriptions of how, food was being prepared and made and eaten. I really felt like I was right there at Geneva's.
I have to say though, there was one scene where we talk about Randy throwing up.
Oh yeah,
I did not need a description of what she had just
I
eaten,
know.
color
That
it was, and the texture of the pink milky waves.
Yikes. I know that was bad.
Did not. That was the one food description that we did not need.
Right.
I couldn't.
And you knew that was going to happen. I mean, they were drinking so much too. There was a lot of boozing.
I wished that I really liked hearing about the Texas Rangers. I am not from there, obviously. I'm from Michigan, and I have like loosely heard of like that, but I didn't really know what that meant, I guess. I didn't know. And I found it very interesting if her portrayal is accurate of the like kind of respect that commanded when Darren would be wearing his badge. And I was like very curious about that and wanted to kind of learn more about Texas Rangers and like learn a little bit about if that was just a story for the book or if that's really true. And, if you live in Texas, does everybody know what a Texas Ranger like looks like? Like, I don't think I would know a Texas Ranger if they like walked into my house. So I just thought that was very interesting. And I just thought that the interactions that came from that status were quite interesting. And like he almost is a different character throughout the book, whether he's wearing his star or whatever you call it, badge or not. So I found that to be quite interesting as well throughout the story.
Yeah, I was really interested in that. I like you, Elizabeth. I didn't really know anything about it. I mean, I think it's something I've heard of, but I've never like put it in context. So I actually just like right before we were meeting was looking Texas Rangers up just to see like today what the and I think there's like 166 Texas Rangers, um, seven of whom are Black as of the last like census. So that's doubly interesting. I think in this book he does make reference to the fact that it's a rarity for a Black man to be a Texas Ranger. And then when you think about what you're saying, Elizabeth, this idea that the Rangers, command a different kind of respect. And what is that like for people in Texas who might have trouble showing someone like Darren respect? And I think, he is two people, which goes back to that idea of like, I picture his uncles like almost on his shoulders, like these, giving him this counsel. And I think that it just goes deeper into the ideas of justice in general in this book, which I don't know if that's a sort of a way to start a greater conversation, I guess, about what you learned or felt about the way that justice worked in this book, or did it always work? I think I don't know what I'm trying to say. I guess because Darren is always like operating from two sides, were there other places that you kind of saw that happening as well?
Before the book really concluded and we find out really what happened that night when Joe Sweet was murdered, something that has stuck with me since reading the book is like once the FBI, or maybe it was the CIA, once the federal government and the local government took race out of it, everyone was like, oh, the case is solved. This is good. We are all happy now. It's all settled. And it wasn't until that they reframed the story as such that they were able to get to that place of kind of a fake conclusion, if you will. Um, and Darren kept on saying, like, no, this has to deal with the Aryan Brotherhood, racism at the core of this, you know. And they're like, okay, thanks. No, we're done here. And that's like I said, an idea or a notion that will stick with me kind of as I live more.
In general, I don't. Police procedurals in particular are not my chosen genre, just because I don't really like propaganda and kind of like the glorification of a system that doesn't usually work for most people. And so, like, when it's written by a Black author, like, clearly she understands that and is putting this character in a position where he knows that. And he's coming at a place where, like, he clearly is aware of that. He's trying to do right and protect people, but also knows that he's basically being used many times just as a face. And like he's getting called out for that later on in the book of like, you're just being used and you're no better than the good old boys too. And you're actually worse than them because you don't even know that you're being used. Um, and like it is a hard line where like he can't really fight for a lot of that stuff of like he makes it clear that he wants to work on those hate crimes and then really like can't assign himself to those cases and like has really limited power for what he can do. And the whole town basically is fine covering up certain cases or certain connections to cases. And yeah, it's just I don't know, tricky and complex. And I appreciate how it was handled in this book, I guess.
But guys, when you keep on saying police procedural, I think like CSI or NCIS, you know, like a 8 p.m. Tuesday CBS show. That is not this book.
No. Yeah, in like the sense of like it's a cop doing the cop job and
This is
going,
like an HBO police
yeah,
procedure.
like true detective. He's
Yeah.
going, he's investigating, he's talking to people, doing paperwork.
I'm like, this is not,
Fox head in his car.
this is not
Oh, yeah.
NCIS Hawaii.
That was gross.
Yeah, I think you could call it also call it like a crime thriller,
Yeah.
if you wanted to look at the other side of it. And I do think it's interesting because it's like they're not small crimes, but they're not small crimes, but it's like this police procedural crime thriller on the top that really is used in a way to kind of expose much bigger crimes within the community itself. Is sort of how I was looking at it.
I think that falls sort of to under more of like the noir genre, where you have all of these like dark or like corrupt, bizarre things happening. So it gets more into that aspect rather than like an open and shut case. And I think with this one, the setting and then the topic of race and him being one of these lone Texas Rangers, that all falls into play and just kind of enhances that noir aspect and allows it to look kind of like bleed out a little bit into different areas to explore. So it's less like open and shut cop shop kind of stuff. It's a little darker, the fringe.
One character that I found really interesting, I'm not going to say I liked him, but um, just his Darren's friend Greg, who worked at the FBI, um, because they kind of grew up together, and Greg was borderline like a brother to him, like very, very close. Um, and then as the story went on, you can see his ambition really kind of taking over his decision making. You initially are thinking, oh, he gave Darren this lead on this case because it sounded like something that um, might have to do with um, race or the Aryan Brotherhood or these complex things. But then it kind of becomes evident that it's really to get his name out there as having brought in this really big case. And so when it starts becoming publicized, he's trying to go on the talk shows and talk about it as though he has had any other involvement besides just pointing Darren in that direction. And it really, like, it kind of made me sad because you're starting off with this guy who seems to be just a really good friend and good, and just kind of devolves into pure ambition and what that can kind of do to your moral compass.
So a lot of people have talked about the setting, like both I think atmospherically, but also I wanted to talk about a little bit like geographically and also historically. Um, just how if you had thoughts about how even like the land was used in this book or I mean like real estate really, what if you think about the town and how it's constructed and also like who lives where. um I don't know if that struck anyone as far as setting or if it was more just like that the atmospheric feel and the food and the descriptions of the area.
Well, I was just thinking of the heat, geography and the weather and how difficult that is. Um, it played a part in just the functioning of Darren, his discomfort, the dirtiness, the bio, all the different the landscape, was a part of the plot. which I was also good. It did make it interesting, gave it some depth.
I really enjoy reading books set in just places that I'm not particularly familiar with. Um, and I actually looked on a map because I couldn't really picture, like, maybe this is me revealing my geography not being my strongest suit, but I was like, East Texas, isn't that just like Houston? And like, I don't know, they were talking about it being so rural, and I was kind of like struggling to um imagine that. So I was like looking at a map, and I thought, as we've said many times, the landscape played a huge role in the story, but I was even interested when they were first talking about like the bayou and stuff, and I was like, okay, I don't think of like I just like was really struggling to picture it. And so I enjoyed like looking at a map and kind of figuring out where things were taking place and what and trying to kind of really picture the landscape and picture like, okay, like Wally has all this land, and then like there's this little cafe that's like diagonal across the street, and then this like the ice house, which is like scary, and all that. And it was just really interesting to picture how everything was kind of laid out, and how they talked a lot about like trying to get over the county line to like feel safer in an adjacent county and stuff like that was just all very interesting to me, and definitely played um the setting is basically a character in the story, and is a huge part of it. But I enjoyed that a lot. I thought it was fascinating.
Okay, and you bringing up the ice house. Um, is that, I mean, I knew it's a bar, right? Isn't it a bar? Why did
Yeah,
they
it's
call
just
it
a
a
bar.
bar?
That's just what they call it.
Like, I just wondered, is ice house a typical term for that kind of setting, or is it, what's up with that?
I
Ice
have heard
house
it
was a new term for
before.
me as well.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Jacob.
It was a new term for me as well. And I think about where I've seen it, and I've only seen it on like big cans of beer at the liquor store.
Exactly, that's exactly.
But I've not seen it heard like we're going to the ice house. It must be a southern thing.
I've heard it, yeah, and it's in the South. Yeah.
It up in some parts of Texas, especially in San Antonio and Texas Hill Country, down to the border. Ice houses function as open air bars, with the
Oh,
ice house becoming a colloquialism for the
oh.
sale of cold beer.
Hmm.
I didn't know any of that. I just thought it was like the name of the place. Actually, it was in my mind, I thought it was called the ice box, but that would be an ice rink.
Elizabeth, just to pick up a little bit on what you were saying about like the actual geography, that part was really interesting to me too. I think especially to think about like, so you think about this tiny town that was built on a former plantation, which in and of itself starts to speak to like the land as power and who owns the land. But also then you have this whole town and this holdout like Geneva's right kind of in the middle of it, and she was given this house and this cafe by, some of her relations who actually are the people who own the rest of the town and are trying to get it away from her. So I just thought that was a really interesting use of the actual like physical and historical setting, but also speaking to the idea of like land ownership and what it gains you and the power that you have. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that Geneva still was able to maintain a certain sort of power. I mean, horrible things happened to like her husband and her son, but within the community, like I don't know, she did hold on to something. And that's partly because she had like a physical place to do it, I guess.
I got a similar i- impression. I don't know if that's the right word for Darren's homestead, or his family homestead, uh, and it being something that like he easily could have, or his family could have sold somewhere along the way. But they really took pride in the ownership of this land, and um, it being kind of the source of generational wealth, which is something that is not available to most African Americans in our country. And having that be kind of what ties him to Texas. Um, I don't know. When you were first asking about that, Lucy, I was thinking of those two places specifically, and what kind of point of pride land ownership can give.
Yeah, definitely
Well,
picked up on that from or with Geneva's place. Like Wally's like, when are you going to sell me this? When are you going to sell me this? And that's hers. Does have some power and she has stake in that area because of how long she's been there and what it means that she still owns this restaurant from back then. Also, like everybody goes there. It's like the community spot. That's where you go to find out what's going on. Because the ice house where everyone's drinking, that you've got the Aryan brothers hanging out there. So, or the Aryan Brotherhood. So, where else are you going to go? You go to Geneva's. And she also has that trailer out back that she lives in nearby. But the vicinity to Wally being across the street, all of that just like made me feel uncomfortable. I just having those eyes on her constantly. And that totally comes into play with how the story unfolds with all the murders at the end. So,
Well, and I was going to say, like, a lot of the mysteries slash issues that happen in this story are related to land, right? Even at the opening, the problem is that, like, a white dude who's part of the Aryan Brotherhood came onto a black guy's land and he's like, get off my property. Like, this is mine, you know? And then there's the issue with Geneva and Wally. And also, it's Wally says all the time, like, the ice house is mine. Like, I own that, you know, which I think is true of a lot of places, but I just wonder also if the history of that part of the country makes it even more prominent there of like, this is like, especially for African American people, if they own land that they've worked super hard to get, like that's a spot where that historically was not an option, you know? And so it just feels like an even bigger um, kind of thing, and it comes into play multiple times throughout the whole story.
I think there's something almost like poetic going on where like Geneva and Wally exist in two different worlds that are a quarter mile apart from each other. And they are polar opposite people, but they're also so close. And that closeness over all of these years might even turn into something that functions like love, but it's hard to call it love because of very obvious reasons. And like the same stinky river that's behind Geneva's shack is the same stinky river that's behind Wally's ice house. Um, they live in the same world, but they're worlds apart, and you see that in their personal relationships too, which I thought was really cool. Um, and especially with the author towards the end of the book is being like, you guys thought like a lot of this stuff is motivated by hate, but like it's really love is the motivation or the lack thereof, and it's easy to recognize one as the other. Um, and that's somewhere baked into the geography of where this book takes place. I couldn't explain it to you, but that's what I think.
Well, I think like also what you're hitting on there with like that relating to the geography is kind of like Wally and Geneva are worlds apart, but they're also geographically very close, but they're also intertwined in a way where like their families are very connected. And so you have Geneva holding on to this small bit of land within like what would be Wally's. And you think about a lot of ways that probably a lot of, like white and black families were connected or would be connected in the history of places like that, especially when this town that was once a plantation. It's like how going back historically, how entwined are these communities? And so, yes, hate is motivating it, but there are also relationships within the history of that town that were love that, kind of got them where they are, I guess.
Oh my gosh, that is reminding me of what she said toward the author said toward the ends of the book, where it's like the same people that white people hate, she's talking about black people, are the same people that white people can't leave alone. And that's very much like Wally and Geneva's relationship. Like Wally can't help himself going over there and eating lunch all the time, but like he hates her, but like he can't leave her alone. And that clearly has also been something that really rang. It's still stuck in my head. Well,
Well, that's so true with like so many of I thought that line really like stuck out to me too, Jacob, because like that's everybody's problem is like it's like just like the Aryan Brotherhood can't let two black people walk into the bar and like have a beer. They have to just like get in their business. And it's like, stop. Go back to your pool game. Anyway.
I have to say though, knowing what Wally did to Joe Sr., all those years he's been walking across the street, walking into Geneva's place, sitting down on the counter and looking at her, giving her that $20 bill to get the same amount of change, knowing what he did, so he also like it must have felt good, you know, stupidly and horribly, but for him to be able to do that, terrible.
Also, didn't he drive over every day? I like laughed at that. He like wouldn't walk, right? He just like would drive his truck across the street. I was like, what are you doing? Walk.
In his steps and I
Yeah, it's like one way going over there and looking her in the eye and giving her this money. It's just like he's still trying to hold on to the power that even though she won't give him what he really wants, which is like her land. Yeah. And was everyone clear on like when you get to the end, and I don't want, but like who killed who? Because it's all of a sudden it just unfolds and you're like, oh, okay. Um, like and and why? I thought it wasn't what I didn't expect it. I guess some of it I could, but like not all of it. I don't know if anyone else was surprised by the way it unfolded or confused or what you thought about how that all worked out.
I have a question. I'm glad we got to this part. So I understand that Wally busted in years ago drunk and killed Joe because he was mad that Geneva wouldn't sell him. Well, about a lot of things. I understand that. And then Isaac covered up for him. But I guess two things I didn't understand is why Isaac even got involved with the Michael Wright thing. And then second, did Keith Older think that he had killed Michael and then kill Missy because she threatened to tell people if Michael died? I basically didn't get the end of the book, I guess, but that was like my interpretation. Anyway, so I'd love to hear what people thought.
I think Isaac got involved because Michael was asking questions about the murder of Joe. So then he was worried that Wally was going to get in trouble. So he finished him off. And
But how
then
did he know to go looking for him on the like back road?
I think he was intentional. I think he just kind of stumbled. I don't know if he stumbled upon it or was following him to see what was up.
Okay.
I think like kind of an accident, honestly.
I know, that's kind of how I felt.
An
But okay.
opportunity, I think.
I thought that I got the impression that Wally like blackmailed in a way Isaac, like forcing him to do it. Because Isaac knew that Wally killed Joe.
Mm-hmm. And he'd covered for him all these years.
Yeah, so I feel like it was sort of like this little pact. Like, I don't know. But I don't think that Isaac did it intentionally or meant to do that at that point. It's just where it was going, and then he was able to just be there and finish it off. But I also
Mhm.
didn't see that. I also forgot that Isaac even existed in this book until he came into play at the end with the car in the barn at Wally's. And I was like, oh yeah, Isaac. I'm like, oh, he probably did something because they all of a sudden they brought him back well enough for me to like, oh, his name popped out. Um, I wasn't surprised that the two murders were somewhat unrelated. I thought that's kind of where Darren was kind of leading the path he was taking us on.
Yeah.
But I still, the whole book, my brain was still fuzzy on who was related to who and who was whose baby daddy and all of that kind of. I had to make notes to kind of keep track. And normally, if I was reading it, I would just breeze through it. But for here, I was like, oh, I'm going to talk about this book. I need to actually know who the characters were. And even in doing so, I couldn't tell you the whole family tree of, Joe Jr. and Missy and Mary, who's married, like that kind of thing. But yeah, we know Wally was the worst. And Keith, that was just like a crime of passion. He killed
Oh,
Miss.
yeah. Well, he like beat up Michael, but then he ended up killing his wife, right?
I
Yeah,
think he killed Missy because he thought Missy was gonna like rat him out.
Right.
yeah. Which is dumb because he beat Michael because of the jealousy over her and they ends up killing her.
Yeah.
I don't think that man was
He
the
did
brightest
seem
bulb or a good
And
person.
so is Wally's father, Jeff, is the true father. Now I'm getting nervous because I'm like, what if I'm just so wrong? Jeff is the biological father of Joe Jr.,
Correct.
which we see mirrored in Keith and Missy's life, because Keith is not the real father of Keith Jr.
Joe Jr. is, isn't it?
Joe Jr. is.
Yeah.
Little Joe.
Little Joe.
Little
Okay,
Joe,
I
the
got it right.
father
Because that
of
makes Missy's child is Geneva's
right,
grandchild.
right. She was trying to have a relationship with
Right.
And I think what's confusing about it is because like Wally and Geneva seem like they're the same age and generation. I don't know if that's true. It just maybe because they're like constantly in conversation in the book. And then, but it was Wally's father that she was having a relationship with. So that kept tripping me out a little bit.
Confused because I was like, why is Wally attracted to Geneva? And then I was like, is he horny for his own mom? And I was like, no, that's not his mom. I had to like, this is why I had to make a diagram because I was like, he's not related to Geneva.
Yeah, I
Well,
get the impression that Geneva is like somewhere between Wally and his dad's generation age-wise.
That's what I also kind of was assuming.
I thought Wally and Geneva were very close in age, because when Geneva was working in Jeff's house, who is Wally Sr., not Wally Sr., but Jeff's dad,
Mhm.
Wally would bring ice cold Coca-Colas and try to sit and talk with Geneva until it became apparent to him that Geneva and his father had a emotional connection as well.
Mhm.
So that's what I believe to be another layer to as to why Wally loved and hated whatever the hell that was. That was another layer to it. But also, guys, I don't really know.
Well, I think he you're right. He had been attracted to her, wanted to, either, befriend her, whatever, and then it was his dad got her, and then I think it just stuck in his craw, that she got this restaurant. Um, she and they're intertwined, and I don't know, I think it's usually all about power and control, and that's what he wanted.
Wasn't there some line at the end, it could be the wrong woman, where Wally like was mad. He was at Geneva's and he was mad and he said something about like, you should have just given me that woman.
He said, you should
Why?
have given me her. Why did you take her? And I think he meant Geneva to Joe.
Geneva.
Yes, is
Yeah,
that
that
right?
makes
Yeah, why? Yeah, because Joe got Geneva, not
Yeah.
him. And that's why one of the reasons he ended up killing him. That was where I got.
Hmm.
Oh, because Joe and Wally are brothers. Joe Sr., right? No, Joe Jr. I
They're
mean, Joe
half.
Jr. Joe Jr. and Wally are half brothers. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait.
Wait, have
No, I don't think so.
Geneva, yeah.
Geneva?
Wally's dad is also the father of Geneva's child,
Oh yeah. So
right?
Joe, yeah, they were talking in when he
So
shot his half brother.
he shot his he shot he shot Joe Sr., right?
Oh yeah, he shot no senior.
I
Okay.
know. See, it's like
God.
you think
Okay.
you're clear on it. This is why. Yeah. So,
Okay.
um, yeah,
Yes.
we might still be all mulling this over when we are leaving this conversation, which we actually are getting pretty close to an hour. So before we finish up, I just want to know if there's anything else anyone wanted to mention about the book that we didn't cover.
I thought this was a good read with a lot to talk about. I know not everyone here thought it was, their favorite book, but I think it's unlike anything we really have read for this discussion series thus far. And I think whether or not we liked the police procedural aspect, I think obviously this was a really great discussion and it was really interesting to um, be able to kind of consider all the things that came up in the book. Really, there was a lot to discuss, even though it was for I think a lot of us a fairly easy read. Although I'm not sure that we know what happened, but no, we do. But anyway, so I was glad we picked this one, and I thought it was a good pick for something a little bit different for this discussion series.
Yeah, I thought so too. I think I may read that second one and just see what's happened. I don't know. Not gonna hurt me. Um, but yeah, it was a different offering for this series.
Just bringing the landscape back into, or the locale back into the um, conversation. The second book is referenced as a Highway 59 novel, which, so many series that have a primary detective or whatever, it's called, like Sanford's books are a Lucas Davenport mystery. So just the fact that she's referring to it by Highway 59 kind of shows that important aspect of the land.
Yeah, good point.
That's interesting. So I know, Anne, you started the second, and Beth, you said you might. Is anyone else going to be compelled to continue or read something else by Attica Locke? I mean, I think I'm interested in the cutting season based on your recommendation, Marissa.
Yeah, I'm interested in that too.
I think I'll give something else a try. I don't know if I'm going to jump right into the next one in the series, but I've heard really good things from several people about is it called Pleasantville? That's one of hers.
I think that one won an award.
I think that won an award, so I thought I might try that one too.
Were the other books by her also mysteries?
Don't
Some.
Some of them were.
She did. This book actually won an Edgar Award, which is a big award in mysteries. It won for best fiction in 2018, and I just read that before we came on in our meeting here, and so I thought, oh, that's cool, which means it was taken with really good regard into like mystery writers and mystery readers, which I thought gave the book a really good nod for the genre.
Yeah. Well, thank you all for your insight and thoughts about this book. I thought this was a fun, interesting discussion, and the book lent itself to that. So I appreciate you all being here. So thank you.